Hello and welcome to the Hawaii International Real Estate Council presentation of Roadmap to Successful Global Transactions in Hawaii. We have one of the top international real estate attorneys in the state joining us today, Craig Wagnild. We will meet Craig in just a few moments. My name is Patrick O'Neill. I'm the principal broker owner at Luxury Homes International, and I'm here today as the president of the Hawaii International Real Estate Council. If you're involved with international clientele now, or you want to work with international clientele, this is the presentation for you. And I think you'll find a lot of value in Craig's presentation. Of course, a disclaimer, nothing should be considered legal advice today, and we'll drop this disclaimer in the chat so you can look at it at your leisure. A big thank you to the board members on the Hawaii International Real Estate Council for all the time they put into the group to coordinate these events. And if you're interested in being on the board, please reach out to myself or any of the board members. We're looking for new people for next year. Would love to hear from you. And also a big thank you to Crystal Bisay, Wendy Brown for coordinating this event today and all that you do throughout the year. And a big aloha to the members of the Hawaii International Real Estate Council that are joining us today. If you're not familiar with our group, we coordinate educational presentations throughout the year focused on international real estate transactions here in Hawaii. And you can see a list of some of the coming events that are happening. If you're not a member, today's your day. Consider joining. It's only $30. You have free access to Zoom meetings such as this one. You also have VIP access to our live events. We've got two big ones coming up. We've got Paul Brubaker, Mid-Year Real Estate Review, always sells out, as well as Ralph Cosa later in the year, the geopolitics. If you're a guest here today and you paid $10 to join, if you just add another 20 to that, we're going to give you a bargain today. You can become a member of the International Real Estate Council. And again, you can reach out to myself or Wendy Brown. We'll put some information in the chat. One of the other benefits is you have access to the video library like this video today. And this is the type of video you probably want to go back and listen to more than once. It's just chock full of information. Coming up, if you are interested in getting your Certified International Property Specialist designation, or CIPS, Ron Phipps is considered one of the best instructors in the country, and it's going to be offered via Zoom, which is very rare. It's hard for us to bring instructors out to Hawaii, so this is a great opportunity. If you're interested, Wendy will drop some information into the chat. And a huge thank you to Guaranteed Rate for sponsoring today. Without their generosity today and what they do throughout the year, we simply could not put on these events. So we're really appreciative of that. And joining us is the Senior Vice President of Mortgage Lending, a familiar face to many, Mr. Leonard Loventhal. Leonard, are you there?
I'm here.
There you are. All right.
Thank you,
So
Patrick.
Leonard, yeah, what's happening with the interest rates?
So I guess if you can throw up that one slide for me, it's a very basic slide, and I will comment, we don't know where rates are going to be tomorrow or the next day or the next month, but we can look at trends and kind of get a feel for where we've been. So this graph is for the last 12, actually now, what, 15, 16 months, starting with January of 23. And you can see there have been definitely some trends up and down. We got under 6 for a while, and everybody was kind of happy. And look what happened after that in the early part of 23. Then we went all the way up to over 7 towards the end. And then this year, we're still in the 6s. So basically, it looks like we're going in this up and down direction for a while. There's no great trend to get down right now. And I guess from a sales point of view, it is what it is at this point. Everybody's been a couple years now, and monthly payments are probably on an average 500, maybe 600, depending on the loan amount, higher than they were just 3 years ago. But everybody seems to be adjusting and living with the realization that these rates are here for a while. The other big difference that I'll point out is that in the past, when rates got over 5 or 6, we always had the adjustable rate mortgages to bring us back down a few points to get us, still into the house. And those adjustable rate mortgage products are not available at this point because of historical trends. So we don't have the arms. These are what we have. We can do some temporary buy downs and things to help in for a few years. And I encourage you to talk to your loan officers and those that are doing the finance to see what options can be available to help mitigate some of the higher payments with the rates. But this
Yeah,
is where we are
and
now.
Leonard, where is the 30-year just vanilla? I know that, you have to be careful what you say, but just the vanilla 30-year rate, where is it at today?
So I wrote it in today, about 6.5 for
Wow.
20% because it dropped a little last week. So we got a little gain. But again, like you said, Patrick, it's basically based on your credit score, your down payment, your home type, occupancy. There's at least 5 to 7 key ingredients to an interest rate, if not, could be up to 10 different items that go into the rate calculation, the length of the lock and all those things. So again, please consult. Right now, it's not an easy time. It's kind of challenging. So take advantage, consult with your officer. Let us know. We'd be glad to help at any time regarding the interest rate environment and the programs. So it's been
Great.
challenging. You wanted me to touch a little bit on the condo issue. This,
If you would.
besides higher rates, we've got the condominium uh, insurance issues that we are dealing with from a lending perspective. Right now, I would say there's a lot of things floating around from what we're doing at our shop is we're not going off a list. If people ask me, is there a list? I would say no. The list is not a good thing to have for these condos that may be underinsured or the subservicing is below what Fannie Mae is requesting. But there are ways to work around it. And it's sort of like every situation is a little unique. So instead of making a list, we don't rely on that. We look at every situation immediately from the beginning and analyze it and determine what is the best course going forward. And we've actually gotten condominiums through that have insurance that, especially hurricane, that may not be 100%. But if the loan doesn't ask for it, we're obviously not going to volunteer that information into the file or to the investor. If they don't ask, it's a great loan, we go forward. And that's how we're approaching it. And we're getting some loans through. Not to say that it can't become an issue. We do check. So again, I would not recommend, asking and being if there's a list because we don't follow that. So hopefully with all these challenges, just give us a call, run it by us, get a feedback, and we'll always do the best we can to put our best foot forward and work the guidelines and the programs to get your clients qualified and get their loan through in a timely
Great.
manner. So
Thanks, Leonard. Thank you. Thank you for the update. Good to hear. And I know we worked with you on a couple of these condo situations, and you did have some good solutions for us.
I'll throw my information in the chat for those of you that don't have it. I appreciate the opportunity. Have a great class and let me know if I can be of any help.
Hey, Leonard, by the way, I like your red hoodie matching your guaranteed rate logo. That's a nice touch.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right. Take care, Leonard. Thank you very much. We really, really appreciate you sponsoring these events. Just a reminder, we will have a Q&A section with Craig. Just drop those into the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll summarize the questions that you have, and hopefully we'll get to everybody. And I think there will be a survey that goes out later. And if you're a member of the International Real Estate Council, you will be receiving the video presentation as well that you can rewatch. Okay, I am so thrilled to have Craig here today. Craig is the managing partner at the Honolulu law firm of Lung, Rose, Voss, and Wagnild, where he serves as chair of the firm's transactional law department. He's a former president of the Hawaii State Bar Association and also served there as the chair of business law and international law sections. Craig's been recognized in Best Lawyers as Lawyer of the Year previously, and also Lawyer of the Year for Real Estate in 2023. His practice really focuses on business, real estate, and international transactions. I've had the opportunity to work with Craig, and he's fantastic. We are so lucky to have him here today. Mr. Craig Wagnild, thank you, Craig, for making the time today.
Well, Patrick, thank you. And thanks to everybody for coming and joining and being a part of this and listening to what I have to say or what I have to offer here. As I sat down and thought about doing this, one of the first things that came to me is that particularly with all of you in the Hawaii International Real Estate Council, members are all probably very experienced in working with international clients and in dealing with a lot of these type of global transactions. And so I appreciate that the best forum would probably be all of us sitting around a table, essentially swapping stories and sharing our experiences and such. And since we can't exactly do it that way, you're going to be listening to me, and nothing puts you to sleep faster than listening to an attorney for over a half hour.
That's
But
not true. That's not true. And by the way, I want to point out that is not a virtual background. That is your actual office, which is the best Zoom background I've seen. Okay.
thank you very much.
All right,
Anyway,
Craig, take it away. You want to pull
it's
up
an
your
honor to be here. I'm going
presentation?
to share my screen. Hopefully I do this correctly, and all of you can see this. And we'll move forward. The program is a roadmap to successful global transactions in Hawaii, and I wanted to share a couple things. First of all, you know, as Patrick mentioned, I'm a real estate attorney. I'm a transactional attorney, so I'm working primarily with real estate business transactions, at times with with real estate financing and other things, mostly commercial stuff, but we also deal with residential transactions. And I've sort of over the years developed this sort of odd niche in my practice of sort of trying to help fix real estate deals that go bad or go awry, and there's problems. And so I've worked with a lot of real estate brokers and agents and such where problems have occurred and we're trying to salvage the deal, so to speak. And that has been, for me at least, a very fulfilling part of my practice, but also a part that has allowed me to see all these different ways that things can go bad. So some of what you're going to get today are the global or the international aspects of areas where we've had these issues come up and problems occur. So I want to talk some about those. Global transactions, I mean, I guess what we're saying about that is really an international aspect, either international parties or in some way that there are international aspects involved. And that may mean that your buyer or your seller is not a U.S. citizen or party, but it also may mean that one of the owners or part of the ownership of it is not. It also may mean that you just have mainland clients, and some of what I'm going to talk about may apply even if they're U.S. citizens, but they're on the mainland, not here in Hawaii. And finally, you may have other situations where, quite frankly, I mean, even Hawaii people are traveling and they're in another country or something. And so some of the aspects of this you may see would apply to that type of situation as well. And a couple of notes, just so you know, I'll make the PowerPoint slides available. So for those of you watching and such, I'll send those on to Patrick and Crystal and such at the Hawaii International Real Estate Council, and then you can look at those later and have those sort of as a resource. And of course, you can look at this again if you want. All right, so let's start out with what I think are the three primary causes of problems, that come up and get in the way of a successful international transaction. One of the first is just a misunderstanding, and this can happen for all kinds of reasons, but particularly when you're dealing with different languages. And I was using an example with one client at a time that we have now we have programs like Google Translate that have made international transactions just so much easier in some ways. So much, I mean, they've helped facilitate it. They've helped us get a document that was in English and get it over into another language and pass it on. They have also been the bane of these transactions that have caused more misunderstandings and problems because that translation may not be quite what is really going on for a lot of reasons. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as the translation of words means something different or implies something different, either in your language or in the other language. I'll give you a good example. The word consideration, for our purposes as real estate people, I mean, the consideration is, what we're giving over to, in exchange for the real estate. So both parties are giving consideration, the real estate and money usually. And that's written in the documents, right? I mean, it's right there in the deed. And And so when you just Google Translate it and you send it, for example, to Japan, and that's where I've had most of my experience and such, you're going to end up with Google Translate's translation of the word consideration. And what I've found is that most likely it's going to translate it as koyo, which is like to take into account or to take into consideration. It's that kind of meaning, which is not the legal definition and what we mean by consideration. Now, that's not to say there isn't a word for it. There is. It's yakuin in Japanese, but Google Translate typically will not use that and will not find that. And so now you've sent something over and you've Google Translated and sent it to a client, and they're not understanding what's going on. They don't understand how that even fits into that sentence. And you're trying to say, well, no, it doesn't mean that. And it's complicated. So I mention this because that's just one word, okay? And you're going to deal with a whole bunch of those type of words. And so this Google Translate, while it helps, is not necessarily a solution to, that's going to guarantee you full understanding on another side. And so international transactions always involve, particularly where they involve someone that primarily speaks another language, this aspect of trying to do our best from the very get-go to make sure that they understand the documents, the process, everything else. The second is a failure to meet expectations. And where do expectations come from? They come from our experience. And our experience is based on what we've done, usually in our country, in our place. So if we're dealing with someone in Japan, I'll give you this example. Japanese that are purchasing a new unit from a condo developer in Japan have this expectation that, quite frankly, the unit is going to be perfect and everything is going to be right. And if anything is even the slightest bit different than what they think it should be or the way exactly perfect, it will be fixed immediately at the cost, and any loss is going to be covered by the developer. And this is not an uncommon experience if you are Japanese living in Japan and buying a unit in Japan. That is not the experience here. And so you can see how a failure to meet expectations could happen really quickly here, unless Japanese are prepared and understand that it is different here. Okay, so that's one example. The third is logistical and technical problems. And this, all of you have had these types of experience and stuff. What it used to be is we'd all get together, we'd sit down with our client, we'd look at the documents, they'd sign it in front of people. We'd have the notary there, but we'd all be doing this in a room, and none of that is happening anymore. Usually oftentimes we're not even seeing the clients very much at all. Many times on these international transactions, they don't even come over to Hawaii. They're buying this unit, essentially unit or properties, essentially sight unseen. They're signing documents in other places. They're signing electronically for things. They don't know what all is needed to happen here. And they need this roadmap for, what's needed. When is it needed? How could it be done? How it can't be done? These are the things that but that they won't know. But if we're not stay on top of these things, they'll get beyond us in a hurry. So, the real message here is plan ahead. But I'm not telling you anything you don't know with that. You're very good at this already. Our real estate, realtors are by their nature, they have checklists, and you have closing timelines and deadlines, and you're giving notices, and so all of this is not unusual. It's just that international clients and transactions like this add a whole nother layer of complexity and a whole nother layer of time that it's going to take to get these things done. So, that's what we're going to talk about here a little bit, and no one transaction is going to have all these things that I'm going to run through with you, but you sort of want to be prepared because some of them will show up in different transactions, and planning and getting out ahead of these things is the key to success and such here. So let's start with number one, and that is, schedule and timing. I'm not going to tell you anything surprising here that there are time differences and date differences involved. I mean, the time differences we deal with all the time, even when we're just dealing with people on the mainland, that we have clients and such that are over on the mainland. We have to keep track of, what time it is there and work out when they're going to send something and when we're going to coordinate having a call or anything else. But the fact that we're dealing with international transactions often means we're also dealing with a date difference. And that can affect a lot of things. So one of the things it can affect is the fact that when you're signing here on a Friday or doing something on a Friday, it may be Saturday where they are. Okay. And it may not be as convenient or even available for them to do some things there that they would be able to do on a weekday, like, get in to see somebody at the bank or meet with somebody there. And so we have to consider all the time that any dates that we're setting into our agreement are taking into account that there may be this difference. And also that national holidays and other things are different in other countries. And so again, by way of example, in my example, I mean, if you're in early May, you've got Golden Week. I mean, it's shut down, man. I mean, that you are not going to be able to do things. They're not going to be able to send money. They're not going to be able to get in to see a notary. There's a lot of issues that can affect a transaction if that isn't considered at the time that you're entering into the contract. Okay. And that's true for, the Obon holiday. And then there's a smattering of others. And so part of this is the message of this is that we almost rotely check the time is of the essence provision in our contracts because it is of the essence. People need to do things when they're supposed to do them. But for international transactions in particular, we need to consider whether or not there needs to be enough flexibility to address things like issues of national holidays arising in Japan or in another country when right at the time we're going to be needing to close or to move things, or whether or not we're going to have issues with moving money, whether or not there are, I've got a client, I had one client that told me halfway through a transaction, oh, by the way, I'm going on this cruise and I won't be available for basically a week, but then I'll be in this port and I could do something then. And we ran around trying to do absolutely everything we could before they left on this cruise because it was going to be a nightmare. And that meant signing all kinds of documents and such signature pages for all these documents and getting them notarized here, even though the documents, at the time had not been fully finalized and agreed to with the other party, because we said, we're not going to be able to get them notarized and done once you're over there. I mean, once you're on the cruise, we're out of luck. Okay. So just by way of example, I'm not going to run through all these and all that, but this is part of the slide presentation you can look at later. But they're the recognized Hawaii holidays and federal holidays, and you've got all these other recognized holidays in Japan. And when you start matching them up, you realize, wow, there's a number of days each month that we may not be able to do something that we otherwise would be able to do. And so maybe that gets written in. Maybe that's a special term in your contract that, holidays is not just state of Hawaii and federal holidays in the US, but also includes any holidays in Japan. And again, it may be a day later there. So, the date that you're setting there, it may be the national holiday already in another country, even though when you look at the date here, it looks like it's the day before it. So you have to keep those kind of things in mind. And, the real rule on that is just, be flexible and be reasonable, whichever side of it. So number two is HARPT and FERPTA. These are not new concepts to any of you, but I want to share a little bit about it. I know you generally understand what these are and how they work, but just for a base layer, let's just all agree that, this is the United States government on FERPTA and on HARPTA, the Hawaii state government, trying to make sure that they don't have somebody buy and sell property and make money and then run off to another country where the government can't get at them to get their taxes on the gain that they made. That's all this is. Okay. But and that's why if you're a US citizen and you're here, and you're a Hawaii resident and you're here, if you fill out the forms and you're exempt, then because they know you're a taxable entity here, they can come after you. But what they don't want is somebody in Japan sitting there, and then the US government or the Hawaii government trying to go after them. Okay, so with that understanding, the US government's looking at it going, well, what happens if they don't do it? And the answer to what happens if they don't do it is we're going after the property. And this, but that isn't the guy that owes the taxes. They said, well, then we have to put the obligation on the buyer. And the buyer's obligation then is to confirm that the seller is exempt, and or if not, that the seller has withholding that is delivered to the IRS. Then the seller can deal with getting that back later. So how does that work on the international? I mean, first of all, on the FIRPTA side of it, those are going to be international, but they may be, and so that means it's somebody that is not a US citizen. Sorry, I'm just making sure I've got the right thing. So, I mean, what it really means for most people is if you're representing a seller, you've got to have your seller ready and understanding what's going to happen, because that's where some of the communication problems happen. But it can also affect buyers, and the way it can affect buyers, or we've seen it affect buyers, is where a seller's selling and there isn't enough money coming back after they pay off a loan or something else to for them to do the withholding. And we have had that scenario before where other things are owed or are coming out of that. And once they've paid all the other expenses, there isn't enough for the withholding. So really, seller needs to show up at escrow with some money for withholding. Okay. And the way that affected it in the deal that I was brought into and to try and resolve was unfortunately a sale where it wasn't closing because the seller wasn't showing up with any money, and escrow and the buyer can't close because there's no withholding that's being done, and it wasn't an exempt transaction. So this is a situation where buyers also need to be planning ahead and thinking about this and coordinating this with the seller's agent and ensuring that if they're not going to be exempt, that they're going to be ready to do this. Okay. So this is the FIRPTA. Again, some of these slides are here primarily to remind you to serve as a resource. And so I'm not going to read through all of this, but the withholding on the FIRPTA side is 15%, unless it's if you've got a foreign company that's registered to do business here, it can be 21% such. There is that certificate of exemption. That's what we're used to seeing, right? With every US citizen or US company and such. But if they're not able to do that, that withholding is going to have to happen. Now, from an escrow standpoint, they're going to require it, and in part because their title company is issuing title insurance and needs to ensure that there isn't a lien claim already from the outset for withholding that wasn't done. So, okay. We also have HARPTA. So HARPTA is the equivalent of FIRPTA. This is Hawaii's exemption and tax withholding requirement. It operates very similarly. It's less. It's 7.25% for anybody that's a non-resident of the state of Hawaii and such. And if a similar type exemption form, that's a form N-289. Now there is a form after that, form N-288C. That's the refund of withholding. So if your client is a non-resident and it cannot file the exemption form, they can later go back after the sale, file for their refund of the withholding, or of any portion of the withholding that they are entitled to. That withholding at 7.25% is likely well above what they need to pay in capital gains on what they've done, but on any gain that they made. But that's the point of it. It's going to be in excess, and you can get some of it back by going and filing. But part of this goes to that whole, right at the start of this, I said, we've got misunderstandings, but we've also got just, situations where, the expectations are different. And ensuring that they don't have an expectation that they're going to get X amount back because of the withholding, they need to know that, your client is going to need to know that right from the outset. And so when I've had this come up with clients that I said, well, there's going to be withholding and such, that's one of the first things I'm trying to tell them. I want their expectations out of the box to be, this is something we're going to have to deal with. Okay. Now, a little note on LLCs here, because this comes up on numerous cases, and again, expectations here. People utilize LLCs as a means of avoiding potential liability and segregating assets, sometimes in connection with estate planning and such. Recognize that LLCs that are disregarded for tax purposes, even though it's a Hawaii LLC, does not make this HARPTA exempt. It doesn't make it FERPTA exempt because it's going to look through to the owners. So if the owner is an international, is a non-resident of the state of Hawaii, or is a non-citizen of the United States, HARPTA and or FERPTA are going to apply. So need to be thinking about that, right up from the outset, not looking at it and going, oh, it's held by a Hawaii LLC, so you're fine. That would be an incorrect assumption. Okay, number 3, real property taxes. I think the big message here is that a lot of times, clients that are buying have looked up online or gotten some idea of what real property taxes are here in Hawaii, and having and what they need to understand for the most part is that Hawaii real property taxes are different if you're a resident, obviously, than if you're not. And it's not just that there's a Hawaii resident. It's not really a deduction, but I mean, part of it is you get a homeowner's exemption if you are a resident and you're living in the property and such. And that is if you're in Honolulu, it's 120,000. But also you avoid Res A. And Res A, each of the counties has their own taxation mechanism, but most of them, most have a similar type thing for properties that are either second homes or you're not, it's not where you reside. And Res A, and here is significant. It applies to anything that's $1 million or more. A standard, now almost that's almost every house. I mean, that probably is a number that should be increased, but the real property tax departments don't, and our government doesn't really have a desire to raise it because it just applies to more things now. But anyway, it applies to that. It automatically is going to apply if it's over that and you have it in an LLC. So one of the warnings is if you have an international family that maybe they're not going to live in the property now, but they may live in it later, that may become their residence, you cannot escape the LLC without transferring it out of it. And if you put it into an LLC, you're always going to be in Res A, and you're always going to be and you're not going to get your homeowner's exemption. You can't get it if it's in an LLC. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's the right decision. I'm saying that's what they've decided. So if you did that, then you'd have to transfer it out, and then you're going to have the costs of removing it, all these collateral costs of moving it out of that LLC and into your own personal name. So something to think about and talk to a client about before they buy into a piece of property like this. So just to give you an idea on the Res A side, what we're talking about money-wise, the way Res A tax works, and again, I won't walk through all this example, but essentially is for the first $1 million, it's at, 0.45%, but then it goes to 105% of everything above $1 million. So in my example below, I used $1.5 million property. All of a sudden you're paying over $10,000 per year in taxes on this property that if you're a homeowner, you pay significantly less. So, you can look at that more at your leisure, but important to understand and for your client to understand the effect of these taxes and how much they're going to be charged, because otherwise you get a strong surprise at the end and say, why didn't you tell me? Okay. One of the bigger problems that we run into with international clients is the fact that at times we have to sign documents, particularly deeds, but sometimes there are other documents that need to be recorded in connection with the transaction. And these include, I mean, these need to be signed in front of a notary. And so the challenge is you have a number of choices. I mean, one of them is, a U.S. notary that's in Japan. There are Japanese notaries, and then there are U.S. notaries, of course, here in Hawaii. The easiest of which is the U.S. notary in Hawaii. I mean, bring them to the bank, you get them to, have them fly over here, have them come meet with me. We've got a notary here. We can sign it here. You can do it through escrow. There's all these different options there. Okay. What is not an option, unfortunately, is we can't put our notary on a plane and send them to Japan and have them meet at the airport and notarize it. That doesn't work. So a U.S. notary in Japan has to be somebody that is legally allowed to do that. And they can only do it essentially on U.S. soil. So that means the U.S. embassy or U.S. consulate. And I've got some rules about how all that works, but it's strict and it's time consuming. You have to make plans way in advance. And so all of this plays into, what you're going to need to do in order to accomplish it, to, do your side of the contract and sign the documents and such. And it may mean your client needs to fly somewhere or it needs to get this all set up. You may look at it and go, well, then it's easier. Let's go and do the Japanese notary. And the reality is that going to the Japanese notary can work, but you're going to have to provide that Japanese notary with the Japanese translation of the documents to be notarized. And then you're also going to deal with a number of other issues, which I'll go into in just a minute. But the next slide I had is just for U.S. embassies and consulates, and this is, for example, in Japan. Here are a bunch of the requirements that you would need to follow through. So worth holding on to and looking at if you're running into that situation where you're going to have somebody show up in front of a U.S. notary that's in one of our embassies or consulates. So here's one of those issues I mentioned that you might run into with a Japanese notary or, in another country, a foreign notary, is that, there's sort of an international size of paper and we, in typical fashion, we don't sign on to that. The world works on a metric system and we've decided to stick with our, our US, inches and feet and pounds and all this. So, so A4 size is pretty standard, whether it's in Japan or in a lot of other countries and such, but it's not here. So can we file an A4 size piece of paper? No, usually not. You can't get away with that. What have we done? Well, we've had to try everything from, cutting the paper down to, to now we can do some recordation electronically. And so sometimes we've been able to work it out with that. But generally speaking, it doesn't work. And so we have sent letter paper over for people to print things out on, because usually we're sending stuff electronically. We're so used to that. The last minute we send it out and print it out and sign it in front of a notary and then send it back. Now we got to plan that a little better in advance. They got to at least have the letter paper. And so for larger transactions, we've sent a ream of paper over to another client so that when they print out on a letter paper. And generally speaking, that can work. The other thing is we can print it all out and, the equivalent of overnight it over to the other country, and then they'd receive it, and obviously would be on letter paper and such that. But if you're not planning for this, you can end up having a real mess because your documents will come back, notarized and ready and all that, and on the wrong size paper, and everybody's running around trying to see, is there any way we can fix this? So number 5 are tax issues. Okay. This is a whole nother seminar. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time talking about the specifics of taxes. What I am going to say is this is something that needs to be talked about and considered right up front. Okay. So I would not be waiting until, we've everything signed off on and we're getting ready now to close. This is something that very early on, I would be saying you need to consult with your tax professionals in your jurisdiction and probably here in Hawaii. We have some good people, here that are very, very adept at And I think I saw that as one of the topics that gets discussed at another HIREC seminar. So it's worth understanding generally, but I don't understand. It gets really complicated. And what I found is that the minute that I start assuming that I think, because I've sat through enough of them that that I think I know what's going on, there's some specific thing I didn't know, or things change and such. And so really the message here is get somebody else involved. I don't want the liability of having either not known about something or not talked about something with them. And I want to get them in, an international client in with someone that's going to talk to them about how they should, whether or not they should buy it, how they should hold it, what they should do when they sell it, all of that stuff. And there's also foreign investment disclosure requirements and other things that may come along with this, that depending on what country they're coming out of and what they're involved with. I'm going to talk to you about one of those here shortly. Estate planning. So this is another one that from early on, you want to start thinking about it. And I usually see it on the far end. You'll see my little what happens if box over there. One of the things that happens when we're in the process of just doing a standard sale with two Hawaii parties, and we're getting ready to close, or we're a little ways before that, and then one of the parties is going to decide, well, I want to take title in this trust, or I'm setting up a trust to take title in, or I'm going to take title in X way. For estate planning purposes. Even with them, we're talking with everybody about, hey, just think in advance, how do you want this to be handled in the event of your passing and et cetera. That to me is one of those things that's so interwoven with tax considerations and other things that it's worth talking about, or at least mentioning early on, because what happens if is the problem that we run into all the time, which is that people call me and say, well, I have this Japanese client. She doesn't speak English very much, but her husband passed away and he has property in Hawaii held in his personal name, and it's land court. and it's a mess. It takes a fair amount of time and money to unravel, to file the petitions, because a lot of things have to happen there, and those could have been avoided had there been better planning. And so this is another area where I believe that there's other seminars, there's certainly other professionals that handle the estate planning aspects of these and that I work with when we're working with international clients. So due diligence. I forget who I was talking to recently. Another real estate agent that was telling me was frustrated with the fact that a number of the international clients that he represents essentially treat him like he's their due diligence person. And I think that part of this message with this is that from early on with the international client, you want to be talking about, well, look, who's going to conduct this? Who's going to coordinate it? What are we going to do with the condo documents? Are we getting them translated? Do we need to get a professional translator to do that? What about the 508D disclosures and your sign off of those? We need to talk about the timing for your review. Are you coming to Hawaii to personally inspect the property? If not, do you have somebody here that's going to do it for you? Or are you just going to expect that I'm doing it all? And then if you're not happy later, when you come and see it after you've closed, you're going to be mad at me and sue me potentially. That's not a good solution. So we need to, this is one of those areas where the solution, I really believe, is that discussion needs to happen like while you're looking, even before you're getting into contract. How are we going to deal with this as we're going through this process? Ideally, they're going to come over and do it. If they're not, then ideally they've got somebody here they trust and that will serve in that capacity for them, and that you can rely on to serve as their eyes and ears. Number 8 was financial considerations, and this has to do with wiring and sending funds, payment of ongoing expenses. All of these things both take time and sometimes are affected by national holidays, by or just by the bank's willingness to release money, that quickly and such. So there can be issues with these. Setting up a US bank account may not be as simple as it is for other clients, because they may not have a TIN or any kind of social security number. They won't have any other taxpayer identification number. So if they don't, they're not going to be able to get this US bank account, and that becomes an issue. It also becomes an issue if you've got income producing properties, because now they've got to be paying taxes on that, and that needs to be set up. And finally, loans. It's very hard for international clients to get loans here. Again, that can be different if they're living on, as permanent residents and such here, even if they're buying the property as separate and not as their primary residence and such. So all of these are questions and things to sort of have on your list of, let's just run through and make sure I understand what we're doing and how we're going to deal with those. And then changes, problems, disputes. I'm running short on time, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk briefly about these. But again, these aren't. There's nothing different about this, except that now we're dealing with people that aren't here, that don't understand these processes: negotiation, mediation, arbitration, litigation. Don't understand what those are or what they mean, and quite frankly, oops, I'm sorry. And quite frankly, are scared of it. And so I think part of the message is, one, they should understand how disputes get resolved, but also we should be looking ahead to try and resolve any of those and make amendments and such, and be flexible as much as we can within transactions. And that means having the other side also commit to being as flexible as possible and reasonable about dealing with things, not just looking to, call something, a default simply because you couldn't make a deadline because it was a national holiday in Japan. There are a lot of issues that come up with commercial properties, and the short list that I have here is not inclusive of everything. But I wanted to provide it because these are the kinds of things that very early on I'm talking about with clients. If you're going to come buy this property, we need to look, are there any licenses or permits that come along with it? Are there existing tenants with leases that need to be assigned? Are there licenses or contracts that need to be assigned or need to be canceled? Are there entity considerations for buyer to be considering for liability protection issues? Are there visa issues? I mean, are they going to come over and this is going to be their business? Are there employment law issues? Are you going to have somebody here working for you that's going to handle this? Or are you going to contract with someone to do it? And if so, are there specific issues for the property and the business? And by that, one of the big ones, I've had so many different clients from Japan come in and want to set up the equivalent of an izakaya. And the liquor license is a significant impediment to that and a significant time crunch to handle it. And so the last thing I want to talk about briefly was the Corporate Transparency Act. And for those of you that are familiar with it, this won't be anything new, but I have to tell you, about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, I was sitting in front of all of these business attorneys in the business law section of the bar and starting a seminar on, hey, this is coming down the pike. And everybody looked at me like, what are you talking about? And now when I'm talking to people about it, they say, oh, I heard there was something like this. Okay, this has happened. This is the law right now. And it is being fought in one state. It doesn't affect Hawaii, and it doesn't affect us or anybody here. And what it is it in a short message, this is a money laundering protection, where at one point the U.S. Department of Treasury realized, man, the U.S. is quickly becoming, the money laundering capital of the world, because you can form an entity and nobody has any idea who the beneficial owners are. And so what's happened is that they installed this Corporate Transparency Act that requires that every company that is registered to do business in the United States, whether a U.S. company or foreign company, disclose the beneficial owners. And that needs to be filed with FinCEN, which is a financial crimes enforcement network. And so the way it works is, if it's a company that was formed up to the beginning of 2024, you have this year to do it. So by the end of this year, it needs to be filed. If it is a company that's formed during this year, during 2024, You have 90 days after it's formed to do it. And after 2024, you're only gonna have 30 days to do it. So basically you form an entity, you're gonna want to register right away. And there are steep consequences and such. FinCEN has said very clearly that they don't want to have to enforce any of these. They're not looking for that to do that, but it's all education. We need everybody to participate. We can help with that. You know, our firm has now set up a program to help do this filing. I have my FinCEN identification number and such, and can file these for companies and stuff here. But it's something to keep in mind and to advise, particularly because international clients won't have any idea about it. And I'm not going to walk through what constitutes a beneficial owner and such here. This is more for you to have, but you can look at it and basically, you know, it's anybody who has substantial control or 25% or more of an interest. Okay. So not inclusives of everything you're going to run into in an international transaction, but some of the main ones that have caused the kind of problems we talked about right at the beginning. Thank you for hopefully staying awake and being here. And I will open things up for questions and ads and your experiences, and we'll
I
go
think we
from there.
definitely stayed awake. Really good presentation, Craig. Question on the Corporate Transparency Act. This
Yeah.
also applies to LLCs, correct?
It does. Yes, it applies to any entities. So corporations, partnerships, LLCs. What it doesn't apply to is obviously individuals and trusts. It does not apply to trusts.
So a lot of the real estate firms in town are formed under an LLC, some filing as S Corp. They need to comply with the Corporate Transparency Act. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, there you heard it. I don't think a lot of people do know about this. One other question on that. Someone who's holding title under an LLC, whether they're US or foreign, do they also need to comply?
Yeah, so this applies to every company doing business in the United States and holding for purposes of FinCEN's definition and such. That includes a company that has a property and is holding property here. So but you have a year to do it. So but that year started January 1st of this year. Now the good news is, I mean, while I'm certainly happy to assist anybody in doing it, you know, we're obviously going to charge a fee for doing that. We'll do it at a flat rate. But all of this can be done online. So clients can go online and file themselves. And the information that I provided you there on the Corporate Transparency Act, you can go, you know, right online and look it up. And just make sure that you actually get the government site, not somebody that's trying to sell you something. But you'll need to complete the form online and pay. I don't know, it's a very small fee to do it.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And I know you touched on this, but what is your advice to agents when their clients ask them, can you please translate this document for me, such as the purchase contract?
Boy, that's great advice. I mean, that's great. That's a great question because it comes up a lot, particularly with clients or I mean with agents that speak, read, write the foreign language. I can tell you that while I can speak, read, and write Japanese, I will use it to help people understand. I'm not a professional translator. I will tell them that up front. And I said, if I am, I'd be the most expensive professional translator you ever had. You do not want to pay my hourly rate for how long it would take me to actually translate something. So we can get a professional translator involved if that's needed. I'm happy to send over to you a summary and then talk to you about it, and I can explain it as best I can in Japanese. And that's for me in Japanese, but but I can't be in a position where my legal advice is essentially getting muddled because my Japanese isn't sufficient to fully explain or just explain it the same way I would in English. And I have to be very careful. And I feel like, quite frankly, for all of you, you're in the same role. You really don't want to be doing a translation work for them. Helping them to understand it is one thing. And you do that in English anyway. I mean, you're helping people understand this crazy weird English that's in these legal documents and what's, you know, how the process is going to work and all that. So that's already being done. But full translation stuff, I would get a legal translator if, you know, professional if they need that.
what we did at our firm, we have a lot of Japanese clientele. We did hire the professional translator, and that's used just as a template to help explain it. So thanks for that. Going back to notarizing of documents,
Mhm.
is there any type of e-notary available? Electronic notary.
There is, but it only applies in places where they can legally, so I'm not clear that that's working internationally right now. And I don't want to say no right now because that was part of what we were hoping was going to happen, is that it would apply there as well. And that's, I don't know is the answer. I don't know whether we've gotten to that point or not. The last time we ran into it, we couldn't do it, or at least we were told, no, don't do that.
Okay.
But
Okay. I don't know if you know
that's
anything
where I'd love
about
to see
this.
it go.
There's a question about foreign owners having an issue getting some insurance on their property as second homes. Are you familiar with that at all?
Getting real property
Property
insurance?
insurance. Yes. So
No, they
certain limits.
shouldn't
Okay.
have problems.
Yeah. Okay.
They shouldn't have
Um,
problems getting, I mean,
okay. Another question. Is it possible to have entire contract executed with seller of Maui real estate in Japan?
contract. Well, there, I'm sorry, can you
Yeah,
read
I
the
know.
question again?
I think the answer is yes. Can they
Yeah,
sign the purchase contract in Japan as a
yeah,
seller of a property in Maui?
that's not a problem. I mean, people are doing by DocuSign most of the time anyway on the contracts. Your issue is going to be, I mean, to transfer the property, you're going to have to sign a deed. And that's where you're going to get to the notary issue. And also the fact that, I mean, you can't DocuSign a deed. So you're going to have to get an actual wet signature done. And that's the one where I would suggest, if you're looking to list it from the seller standpoint and all, I would talk about how are we going to deal with that issue, you know?
Yes. Okay. And then this might be a long answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Typically, what we're seeing with foreign purchasers, they're either holding it in a foreign company, Hawaii LLC, or in a personal name. Again, might be a long answer, but benefits, pluses, minuses, those three different types of way of holding the property.
Okay. Well, let's start with the first thing. I mean, which is that, it really comes down to a lot, it's sort of a matrix of decisions. Okay, when you're saying property, if we're buying a residential property, okay, let's go to the first issue with that. Are they buying it because they're going to move over here at some point and they want to live here? Because I've had that, where they come over and they want to put their child through school here in Hawaii or whatever. And so they're buying it, and initially they won't be living here, but then they're planning to. Why is that important? Because if you put it in an LLC, you will, even though you come here, you're a full-time resident, you've got a visa or whatever, you will not get a deduction, an exemption of the for as an owner occupant from real estate taxes, and you will not be exempt from Res A. So if you put it into an LLC, so I wouldn't ever suggest that if you're planning to live in it, just because it's significant money. Are you going to be renting it out? Is that why you're putting it into an LLC, or are you doing something else commercial with it that you want the liability protection there? I think a lot of people look at LLCs and feel that, well, that means that I'll be exempt from HARPTA and FERPTA. Possibly, okay, but not if you just form it and you leave it as a disregarded entity for tax purposes. Then it'll always look through. If you form it and then file to have it taxed as a corporation, from then on, you're going to be filing taxes every year as a corporation, as an entity here, then you will get that benefit. I mean, then it will be recognized and you can avoid the HARPTA and FERPTA and such. But you've got other issues. I mean, if you're renting it out, now you got money coming in, you're going to tax at a corporate level, and then you're going to have money that gets sent down to you. And that's where it gets very complicated as to how to set that up. And then
Okay.
finally, none of that even talks about estate planning issues and other things. So, I mean, that all of that is when I was saying they're kind of intertwined. And involve, a good discussion that should be had before, as you're looking around, or before you start looking around, let's figure out what we want to get and how we want to hold it.
Great. Craig, thank you so much for sharing all the information today. For all the brokers that are watching this live, or if you're seeing the recording, uh, Craig is just fantastic to work with. I can't say enough good things about him, and so experienced. Thank you for sharing all that wisdom today. Really appreciate your time. Okay,
Thank you.
well, everyone, until next time, from the Hawaii International Real Estate Council, happy selling, be well, be kind. We'll see you next time. Aloha.